good evening, everyone. Glad to see everybody. Hello. All right, so well, this is our, like, what is this? This is the second to last Digging Deeper with regards to the book of Numbers.
Yes.
I don't know what we're gonna do with ourselves. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna be into Titus soon enough, so that'll have lots of fun discussions.
Yeah.
All right, well, since we got everybody settled in, I'll go ahead and open us in prayer. Almost settled in?
I appreciate it.
All right, let's pray. Father, we just thank you for this day. Thank you for your goodness. We just ask that you would bless this time. Teach us by your Holy Spirit as we dig deeper into this passage, that we may apply it to our lives. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. All right, over to you, and I'm going to do all the other things that I do.
So the Levites received 48 cities total. And if you'd like to know a list of the names, you can go to Joshua 21, verses 1 to 42, and you'll find the list of all 48 cities. So they received 48 total cities to live in, and 6 of the 48 were to be designated cities of refuge. R.C. Sproul, in one of the daily devotionals from Ligonier.com, said regarding the concept of these cities of refuge that law and grace are utterly opposed to each other as means of salvation. We cannot obey the law of God perfectly, so we cannot be justified, declared righteous before God by keeping the law. And he references Romans 3, verse 20. Grace, God's free gift, is grace only if salvation is based not on our keeping the law, but on Christ. And he references Romans 11:6 and 2 Corinthians 5:21. Yet, though law and grace are mutually exclusive when it comes to receiving salvation, there is graciousness in the law. Joshua 20 tells us how Joshua designated the cities of refuge in Israel in keeping with the provisions of the law. 6 cities are named, 3 on the west side of the Jordan River and 3 on the east side. No place in the land of Israel was more than 1 day's journey from at least one of these cities, so God graciously provided ample opportunity for preserving the life of the one who killed without intent. But the grace evident in this provision was not at the expense of justice. A person would not be admitted to the city merely by claiming that he was guilty of manslaughter. First, the elders gave the claimant an initial hearing to determine whether there was good evidence that he was guilty of manslaughter and not murder. And with that, you think of the grand jury deliberations. Okay, is there good evidence to bring these charges? Okay. So only then was the person admitted into the city of refuge, Joshua 20, verse 4. He would then enjoy protection from the avenger of blood until a formal trial before the congregation. God showed grace without compromising the value of human life when he provided the cities of refuge for those who committed manslaughter. John Calvin comments that the, quote, temporary exile of the one guilty of manslaughter clearly showed how precious human blood is in the sight of God. When we do not support appropriate penalties for the taking of human life, R.C. said, we show disdain for other people and for the Lord in whose image we are made. Let me say that again. When we do not support appropriate penalties for the taking of human life, we show disdain for other people and for the Lord in whose image we are made. Does this distinction regarding the need to, quote, support appropriate penalties for the taking of human life, end quote, cause me to rethink how I've responded to such things as legalized abortion and euthanasia? If so, how so, and if not, why not?
No. Still feel the same way.
Why?
Because it's human life, because we're all created in God's image, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's saying that for someone who maybe thought a different way, but no,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is, that has never been a big issue for me. I've just always felt the same way about that, so.
Yeah.
that has- I've never vacillated either way, so.
Yeah. It's interesting though, you know, that when you stop and consider the arguments that people are making for legalizing abortion and euthanasia and so forth, you know, that some, you know, as an example, one of the biggest arguments is that abortion is health care. And if you do not provide health care, then you are discriminating. Okay? So, you know, it's it's health care for whom? You know? And so, you know.
I mean, it's such a hard issue, that's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just look at everybody, people just devalue their own lives by the way they live. So if they devalue their own lives, of course they're going to devalue anything else, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just our whole culture is just like, it's only what I want, and I really don't care.
Matter of convenience for
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah, of what's going on in anybody else's life, or, you know, just as long as I'm okay. So, yeah, it's very sad, but
Yeah.
it's, I mean, all human life is devalued all the way across.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. I mean, you know, there are folks that think it's best to just terminate life for old people because, you know, it avoids them having to go through suffering. So I'm doing a humane thing, kind of like the providing health care argument, you know, to terminate someone's life. And I hate to say it, but you know, sometimes in the back of my mind it's, or is it because taking care of them is so inconvenient for you?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a matter of
Well,
convenience.
isn't that the same argument that people sometimes use to put a dog down?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing, I mean, and I love animals, I'm not an
Yeah.
animal hater at
No.
all, but I mean, they're equal, you know, like little animals are equal to little kids, you see
Yeah.
that all the time, I
Yeah,
mean, there's
people
no.
consider it that
Yeah,
way,
it's
it's
their
not.
little kids,
Yeah.
so, not again that animals aren't great, but you know,
Yeah.
we are above.
That's right.
Humans are
But-
above of
But
all.
if we have that mindset for a dumb animal, you know, how easy is it for some to take that same thought process and now let's just apply it to old people too,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, because we're doing the humane thing for them,
yeah.
you know. So yeah, you know, but I just thought that RC made a good point that if we do not support appropriate penalties, and that's just it. I mean, what are the current appropriate penalties for someone performing a legal abortion? There are none.
Yeah.
You see, and that's just it. By it being legalized, okay, there are no penalties. I'm operating within the confines of the law. You know?
Well, it's a fetus, it's not a person.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's
Yeah.
the argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a cluster of cells.
Yeah. A glob. You know?
But I've never heard a woman that wants a child, when they become pregnant, say,
Yeah.
I have a
Fetus.
I have a fetus.
Yeah.
Pregnant with the
Yeah.
jelly bean.
Here, put your hand, you can feel the fetus kick,
What it is.
you know?
Yeah.
No, yeah,
It's all on the point whether it's wanted or not.
yeah.
You know, if in your mind you don't want the baby, then you can't call it a baby.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
So-
then you'll have to think twice about it.
So we're back to who's,
Yes.
it's more convenient for me.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe I can live with my decision easier if I get to dehumanize a human being by calling it something else, you know. And you're not, you know, killing the baby, you are aborting a fetus. You are aborting the pregnancy, okay? Well, to abort the pregnancy requires the child to be expelled,
Yes.
okay? And so it's one of those things where, but we use, oh, well, we terminated the pregnancy, you know? That has nothing to do with the life that we're talking about. So, yeah, so it's just an interesting thing, you know, when we do not support appropriate penalties for the taking of human life. You know, how easy is it? Because number one, we have, like I said, we've now legalized it. So there are no penalties for that in a lot of places. So, but what if during the initial hearing, the elders determined that the person actually committed murder? So Deuteronomy 19:11-13 tells me, but if anyone hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him and attacks him and strikes him fatally so that he dies, and he flees into one of these cities, then the elders of his city shall send and take him from there and hand him over to the avenger of blood so that he may die. Your eye shall not pity him, but you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from Israel so that it may be well with you. John MacArthur, preaching on this passage, once said, you know how to get rid of evil in your society? Give just punishment speedily for people who commit crimes, even perjury, as in this case. And those which remain shall hear and fear, and henceforth commit no more any such evil among you, and thine eye shall not pity. Now notice this, MacArthur goes on. There is no place in a law court for pity. You see, pity is not in the law court. The law demands justice. If society is to be preserved, there must be justice. The court is not the place for pity. I'll always remember the judge in Pasadena who felt sorry for the rapist and let him go, and then he raped and murdered a 9-year-old girl, and the judge felt sorry for the little girl. The court is not a place for pity. It is the place to hold the standard of righteous law high. Why? Because that and that alone will preserve society and put fear in the hearts of men. You take a sinful man, innately sinful with a depraved nature, and give him his rights, and he'll run right into chaos if you don't make consequences for his behavior. And I'll tell you, parents, start it with your children. If there are no consequences in the behavior of your children, they will never learn what it means to live a righteous life. Never. Have I seen the effect of pity in our system of justice? If so, how so? And if not, why not?
Try not to watch the news.
Yeah.
Well-
I was just trying to
No
say,
bail.
I'm trying to think of an example. I'm sure there is one, but I just can't think of one.
How about sanctuary cities and sanctuary states? Where we're just not going to enforce particular laws as it relates to immigration. Where we are going to protect illegal immigrants.
How about the no bail
Yeah.
policies?
Yeah, the no bail. Why? Well, because they're a victim. you know?
The what now? What'd you say, the what?
No
I-
bail,
Policies.
where the guy commits the crime and he's put right back out on the street.
Oh, no, okay, I see what you're saying,
Yeah, I think that, I think that one probably is more of the two, right? Is the one that more easily and more quickly can affect anyone is those bail reform laws. Or the changing of standards of, lowering or whatever, because you have situations, I mean, where people are like, just committing lots of different crimes. I recently there's that story of that, activist that was actually killed in a brutal robbery, and now her family doesn't want anything done because they feel that, that's the best way to honor her, because she was kind of an activist of that sort. And I'd say, well, I mean, that's fair enough, okay? I mean, that's, I guess, if that's, you think that that's the convictions, but one has to wonder what was going through her head as she was being drugged, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and that, so, I guess, we can applaud people that live by their convictions, but I think most people, though, they like things that sound lenient and loving in principle, but until it shows up at their doorstep.
Yeah. And just so you know, the way that Oxford Dictionary defines a sanctuary city, they've actually now made a definition for it. A city whose municipal laws tend to protect undocumented immigrants from deportation or prosecution despite federal law. Okay? And the argument, and just so you know, as an example, Columbus has not officially declared themselves a sanctuary city. Okay? Even though their policies reflect that. The reason why they have not declared themselves is because President Trump said, if you declare yourself to be a sanctuary city, we cut off federal funds to you. So this way they can keep the federal funds coming in and in action be a sanctuary city. Okay?
But what was the argument though?
And the argument is, in this article that I read, it said, Columbus is an open and welcoming city in policy, not name.
Yeah, and I think, what was it you said? They said that their position, and it's honestly, I feel like it was a kind of a clever argument.
Yeah.
It's not their job, right?
Right. The argument was, we don't require ICE agents to issue traffic tickets for us, so they shouldn't require us to detain people for them. Not my job.
No common sense.
Yeah. So, and here's the thing. This, of course, was back in 2021. There was an article written by Becca McNeil in Christianity Today called "The Hiding Place: Asylum Seekers Pray to Leave Sanctuary Churches." After 1,000 days, Miriam Vargas still believes that God is watching over her and her two daughters as they hide from deportation inside First English Lutheran Church in Columbus, Ohio, which is located on East Main Street. But she is also still afraid. "I do have that fear always," she told Christianity Today through a translator, "that somebody is going to come into the church and take me away from my family." Vargas is one of about 50 women across the United States who sought asylum in churches as a revived sanctuary movement emerged in response to President Donald Trump's efforts to increase deportation and get tough on immigration, illegal border crossings, and refugees. Now that Joe Biden is in the White House proposing a kinder, more generous immigration reform, the latest chapter of the sanctuary movement may be drawing to a close. Vargas spent 31 months worrying that Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, could still detain her, separate her from her 2 American citizen daughters, ages 7 and 11, and send her back to Honduras, currently one of the most dangerous places in the world. In March, she had been granted an order of supervision from ICE saying she won't be deported. But she and others like her are not ready to breathe just yet. Vargas doesn't love living inside a church. It's being in 4 walls 24/7, she said, but she will wait a little longer. So this idea that we see back in Numbers about sanctuary cities, well, it wasn't a new idea. It actually was being used by the Romans and Greeks centuries before, where people would run to the temple of their god and cling to the posts because no military, no governing official would enter a temple and do violence. So it was a safe space. Even though in today's society, there is no law precluding police or agents to enter this church and physically remove an illegal alien or a convict, okay, of any kind. In fact, if we were to take on one of those people, they could come in and get that person and arrest Wally for harboring a fugitive.
But then we have to, so interestingly enough though, right? And this is one of those moments where, because there is no law with regards to that, then at some point, if they had made new laws that then made anything that we happen to be saying illegal, they could just come in and drag me off anyhow.
Right.
Right. So it is interesting that I've always found fascinating that you always have to be careful how much you argue any one argument one way or the other. Right. You got to be careful because it cuts both ways.
Well, what they're saying is though, even though it's not against the law for them to come in to do that, they will probably not do that because of the optics of the community seeing, people busting down the church door to drag someone off to jail, okay?
Canada didn't seem to care.
Yeah. Well, especially if you're a trucker. But, so.
You're safe, Wally. I paid my dues last year.
Yeah, there you go.
I got another few years if I do again.
Yeah. So, I think, it's one of these things where we really have to kind of, and the reason why I'm kind of digging into this a little deeper is because if we don't understand this concept of the city of refuge, okay, and the connection that Wally was making between that and Christ being our refuge, go to Psalms 143, verse 9. Psalm 143, verse 9.
Deliver me, O Lord, from my enemies. I take refuge in you.
Yeah. The ESV reads it, deliver me from my enemies, O Lord. I have fled to you for refuge. What about Psalm 142? One previous. 142 verses 1 to 7.
With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see. There is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. I cry to you, O Lord. I say you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me.
Yeah. Do you see? There is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. I cry to you, and no one cares for my soul. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. If we don't understand this, really how the idea of a city of refuge works, then we really don't understand, in some ways, when David is crying out to God and saying, you are my refuge. Well, what's he talking about? What does that look like? And in the point that he says, I flee. Okay? In the previous, in the Psalm 143:9, I flee, to your refuge. I am running, and I think the thing that we have to really, hone in on is to really start to understand better what happened. And to that end, how many of you ever watched the old version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame? Quasimodo?
Yeah, the black and white one?
Yeah, the black and white.
Not the cartoon.
No. What happened is that Quasimodo, the hunchback, was in love with this beautiful lady who was being pursued to be tried and hung for crimes. And he came out of the church. He was the bell ringer there. Oh yeah, that name rings a bell. Ba-doom boom. Yeah. Do you know, have you ever heard of Quasimodo? No, but the name rings a bell. Anyway,
Just couldn't resist.
I couldn't resist. He brings her into the church, Notre Dame, yelling, sanctuary, sanctuary. Okay, in medieval age, they continued the idea that you could come to the church for sanctuary from being, pursued. So to actually see this was actually neat. This is an actual transcript of, if you will, of pertaining to Colson,
What?
a fugitive named Colson.
Okay.
In the register of St. Cuthbert's shrine at Durham Abbey, a sanctuary recognized since the 9th century, is the following account of a certain fugitive named Colson. Memorandum, that on 13 May 1467, one Colson of Walsingham, County Durham, who had been detected in theft, and for that reason apprehended and lodged in jail, managed at length to escape, and fled to the Cathedral Church of Durham on account of its immunity of rest. While standing near the shrine of St. Cuthbert, he prayed that a coroner, 44, might be assigned to him. On the arrival of John Racket, coroner of the ward of Chesterless Street, Colson made confession of his felony, and standing there took his corporal oath of abjuring the realm of England with as much dispatch as possible and of never returning. This oath he took at the shrine of St. Cuthbert before George Cornforth, sacristan, of the Cathedral Church of Durham, Ralph Bowes, Knight and Sheriff of County Durham, John Rackett, Robert Thrilkett, Undersheriff, Hugh Nolan, Nicholas Dixon, and many others. By reason of such renunciation and oath on Colson's accoutrements, all Colson's accoutrements were forfeited by right to the aforesaid sacristan as pertaining to his office. Therefore, Colson was ordered to take off his clothes, to his shirt, and to deliver them to the sacristan for his disposal. And when the sacristan had received them all, he freely gave them up and restored to the fugitive all the clothes which he had up to then been wearing. After that, Colson departed from the church and was delivered by the sheriff to the nearest constables, and so on from constables to constables, holding a white cross made of wood as a fugitive, and was thus conducted to the nearest seaport, there to take ship and never to return. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary defines a coroner has nothing to do with medical examiners. It's an officer of the county, district, or municipality, formerly also of the royal household, originally charged with maintaining the rights of private property of the crown. So he was an official of the state, okay? So, what happens? Colbert, who's caught being a thief, escapes from jail, runs to the church, and pleads for sanctuary, okay? And if you remember back in Judges 35, you know, if you didn't do anything, you know, you ran to the city of refuge. And there, the head of the church meets him, and he pleads his case, okay? Which is exactly what happens in Numbers 35. Now, back then in the day, the longest he could stay in the church was 40 days. He had to make a decision whether to submit to trial or confess, whether he did it or not, to the coroner, I'm a thief. If he did that, he had to give up everything he owned, even literally the shirt on his back. Normally, instead of him getting his clothes back, he would have been given a monk's cloak, no shoes, no hat, and would have been escorted to, as in this case, to the nearest port, and a ship's captain had to accept them on their ship. No money, no clothes, no friends, no nothing. Goes, in this case, in England, they would ship them like to France. Good use of France, you know, and dump them there. Well, the people in France, because they see all these folks running around like that, and they have absolutely nothing, they're not welcomed with open arms, okay? So the impact of committing to this was, you know, you have to leave England. And it wasn't a question of whether you did it or not. You either went to trial, and oh, by the way, in England back in the 1400s, even for thievery, you know, the penalty was hanging. Just about every offense was hang them. You know, steal a horse, hang them. You know, that's why out west, you know, they hung horse thieves, I guess. I don't know.
But if
Yeah.
you were particularly bad,
Yeah.
you'd get drawn and quartered,
Right.
which was horrendous.
Yeah. So the reason why I bring this up is because if you read in Numbers 35, you know, they stayed there until a trial could be held by the congregation. Did you notice that? It's not a jury, it's the congregation. It is, you know, the people. So, and if they were, yes, you are a you are a manslayer and not a murderer, you get to hang out in the city now and up until the high priest dies, and then you can go home. Okay? So it's kind of like what we see even in the 1400s, the same scenario getting played out.
Well, I mean, it's something I didn't really harp on it a lot, but it really, I mean, you can see the foundations of Western law in the Mosaic Law. I mean, that's why the Supreme Court literally has MOT for Moses, the lawgiver, right? I mean, that's why that's carved into the side of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much, you know, these aspects have just come down over the millennia now.
Yeah. So the MacArthur Study Bible points out that the avenger of blood refers to the person chosen by a family to deal with a loss suffered in that family. Here, the close relative of a homicide victim would seek to avenge his death, but not until proper judgment was made. R.C. in his devotional went on to say that, quote, the avenger of blood, a close relative who was tasked with punishing the killer, could not lawfully kill the person guilty of manslaughter as long as the killing was found to be unintentional and the killer remained in the city of refuge. That's Numbers 35, verses 9 to 34. So these cities of refuge would pretty much have a bunch of people who committed manslaughter running around. Well, how well would I handle having a person who is out on formal probation for some crime attending my church? And why?
Well, we're presuming, I mean, they didn't get convicted of murder, they got convicted of manslaughter, manslayer,
Right?
which means there was no intent to kill a person.
That's right. Let me give you a little bit of a, but they had to stay put until the high priest died. Currently, manslaughter is a felony, and you can be imprisoned up to 11 years. Okay? And there's different kinds of manslaughter. There is voluntary and involuntary manslaughter. And there's aggravated involuntary manslaughter. Aggravated involuntary manslaughter, you can be imprisoned up to 20 years. Some serious stuff. Now, so voluntary might be you engaged in a fight, and as a result of the fight, one of the people dies, okay? Or, you come home, you find your wife in bed with the other guy, and in a heat of rage, you blow the guy away. That's voluntary manslaughter, or it could be. Involuntary would be like a DUI resulting in the death. Or, we see it with movie actors, the reckless handling of a firearm. Okay? Now, like with the DUI, if it's, were you drunk? Yes. Were you breaking the law when you got in the car and drove? Yes. Were you driving under the influence? Yes. But you did not get in the car with the intent of killing someone. Because murder requires planning, premeditation. Okay? And that's pretty much what you see in Numbers. If they laid in wait and planned and killed them, that's murder. And that's, so that's kind of the difference. It's still true today. Okay? So God left the selection of the cities of refuge to Moses, but it was God's grace and mercy that set out the requirements for their locations and the rules governing the conduct of both the accused, the accuser, and those tasked to determine whether the accused person committed murder or manslaughter. Regardless of the jury's determination, there were consequences for the accused's actions. How about me? Are there consequences for the sins I have committed? Or do I believe that God's grace and mercy not only covers the sin, but the consequences as well?
I mean, just like we got to look to David to
Yeah.
see that that's not true, so.
Oh, you mean like in 2 Samuel 12?
Yeah. I mean, what happens all the aftermath after that? Yeah, that's a great thing, God forgives. I mean, and that's the thing, we think about when like murderers get saved.
Yeah,
Of course, they're gonna be spending eternity in heaven, but that doesn't take away from the consequences of what they've done on earth and having to take that punishment, which is a different thing, so.
right.
Yeah, it's the same way with us. I mean, sometimes God's grace is so good, whatever your consequences are, they could be a lot worse, you know, because God is just so good to you, but yeah. But honestly, if we got a free pass on everything, it would just be like if every day was a great day, we'd never go to God for anything, because we'd just be like, everything's, I've got it all, I don't have to worry, you know, I have to
Yeah.
count on God, so.
Yeah,
But isn't that what the world thinks today?
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
They-
And you know, and the interesting thing, the one thing that always kind of, you know, sticks in my mind with the story of David in 2 Samuel 12, you know, in 12 verse 5, basically says, David deserves to die. And in verse 13, he's told, but you won't die. And then in verse 14, the child shall die. And it's always in the back of my mind, you know, David's sin resulted in the death of an innocent. Isn't that true of the involuntary manslaughter charge where the DUI driver goes out and kills an innocent with their car? It's the same kind of thing. John Piper had some kind of an interesting thing. The aim of the consequences of forgiven sin, let me say that one more time because it's important that you get the context. The aim of the consequences of forgiven sin is not to settle the accounts demanded by a just penalty. That's what hell is for. There is a judgment whose purpose is to vindicate the right by paying back the wrong and thus establishing equity in God's kingdom of righteousness. But the aim of God-sent consequences of forgiven sin is not to settle accounts demanded by the penalty of justice. The aims of God-sent consequences of forgiven sin are: one, to demonstrate the exceeding evil of sin; two, to show that God does not take sin lightly, even when he lays aside his punishment; and three, to humble and sanctify the forgiven sinner. Hebrews 12:6 teaches us that, quote, the Lord disciplines him whom he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. The purpose is not to penalize, but to purify. Quote, he disciplines us for our good so that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful, yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. That's Hebrews 12:10 and 11. Not all of the disciplinary pain ordained by God is directly owing to some sin we have committed, but all of it is ordered for our good as forgiven sinners. This is immensely important to teach in a day when there is an imbalance of emphasis on the father's forgiving tenderness to the exclusion of the father's forgiving toughness. There are churches out there that will talk about God's forgiving tenderness, and they never address God's forgiving toughness. You know, the consequences that are still there regardless, you know, of whether or not the sin is forgiven or not. So what is the difference, if any, between someone who is innocent and someone who is not guilty? Or is there a difference? Are they one and the same, or is there a difference?
Y'all gonna have to answer. I answered this earlier.
I know the answer too.
I don't know.
We've talked about this.
Being innocent, you did not commit the crime.
Oh, okay.
Being not guilty says that the prosecution could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person committed the crime. That's the reason why in court you're not found innocent, you are found not guilty. Okay? But there is a difference. Innocence is, I did not commit the crime, period. Okay? And it's interesting from in law today, for defamation, you know, everybody wants to talk about, you know, I was defamed, I got triggered, whatever. Okay? There is an affirmative defense. And an affirmative defense is, if I can show this, your complaint goes away. It's done. It's dead. Truth is an affirmative defense. If I said, Miss Deb stole $200 out of the church account, okay, and she gets, oh, how could you ever say that? And I'm going to sue you. I'm going to take you to court for defamation. You've hurt my, you know, my character and my image within the church. But if I could show where she actually stole $200, we're done. Her case goes away because truth is an affirmative defense. Isn't that funny? I came to testify about what? The truth, right? Why? It's an affirmative defense. Truth always trumps every complaint that anybody could ever have against me. So here's the lesson to walk away with. If I speak truth,
Doesn't mean they'll believe you.
yeah, but believing me is not an element of the defense. So, wow. Sir William Blackstone, in his commentaries on the Law of England, 9th edition, book 4, chapter 27, page 358, 1783, reprinted in 1987, says,
That was well attributed.
yes,
Like we're gonna check
for
it
the
out.
law holds that it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent suffer. Ben Franklin upped the ante. That, he said, quote, that it is better 100 guilty persons should escape than that one innocent person should suffer, is a maxim that has been long and generally approved. American justice is based in part on the concept that a person is innocent until proven guilty. How's that working for us?
It's so weird, I heard this phrase this week.
Yeah.
This exact phrase about,
Yep. It's used quite often on appeal, especially. We used it when I was practicing as a paralegal. We actually represented Walter Smith, who had been wrongfully imprisoned for rapes that he did not commit. And DNA proved him, which was not available when he was actually tried. So he was released, and he had been wrongfully imprisoned, and there is a wrongful imprisonment statute that would allow compensation for, or damages for being wrongfully imprisoned. And one of the arguments is that we would much rather the guilty go free than to convict one innocent person. But how's that really working out for us? How's our legal system, how is our administrative appeal processes, you know, and so forth with employers and HR and things like, how's that really working that you are innocent until proven guilty? Notice, doesn't say that you are not guilty until proven. It says you are innocent. I did not commit the offense that you're saying. Okay? I should be treated as if I did not commit the crime until you can prove that I'm guilty of it. And then I guess here's the thing, how quick and or easy is it for me to judge someone's guilt or innocence before a trial is even held? Do we tend to render judgment from on high of someone's guilt or innocence even before the trial happens?
Of course we do.
Yes.
Well, and if you want proof of it, if we as a people did not do that, there would never be a motion for change of venue because I can't get a fair trial here. I would never have to move the trial to a different location to get a fair trial if the tendency was not to try a person. And isn't the media wonderful in backing that up with all the facts that you hear about in the news, you know, to foster and ferment your decision on someone's innocence or guilt? God requires the witness of 2 or 3 witnesses to convict someone of a capital offense. Capital offenses are murder, rape, that kind of thing. Nobody could be put to death based on the testimony of only one person. In today's system of justice, if we don't have eyewitnesses, then we look to see if the accused had motive, opportunity, and means to have committed the crime. Circumstantial evidence. And we can bring in expert witnesses who are permitted to testify in court because they have special education, training, knowledge, or proficiency in a field that is relevant to the case, such as a surgeon in a medical negligence case. Which system of justice would I want if I was on trial today, and why? Would I want the Old Testament, you gotta bring 2 or 3 witnesses? Or would I want to be tried in a court where circumstantial evidence could wind up convicting me with absolutely no witness to the crime?
Well, I mean, you can commit murder though, and there not be a witness, that's the thing. I mean, people do a lot of stuff that think they're getting away with.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, it would be great if you could have a witness for every crime, but I just don't know that you can. I mean,
Yeah. But which would, if you were being tried today for, let's say, murder, okay, would you want, you know, if you can't produce 2 or 3 witnesses, you know, reliable, valid witnesses, I walk. Or would you rather be in a court where, you know,
well, okay,
A
I mean,
witness,
if I'm innocent,
possibly,
sure,
right.
let's have the witnesses, because there are none. I mean, yeah.
yeah,
You know, let's remember, right? Jesus
Yes.
was truly
Yes.
innocent.
Yeah.
yeah,
But they did find witnesses, they were just not all consistent witnesses.
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point about things that show up on our front doorstep here, you
Right.
know, there's always, you know, 2 witnesses. God's one of them.
Yep.
He sees it whether we want to admit it or not. And one other person, I got my 2, you know. So this was kind of interesting, and we've only got 5 minutes left, and I wanted to touch on this because John MacArthur went on in his sermon that we had previously talked about to point out that, quote, the statement, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, breach for breach, and all those, you know what it means? The punishment must fit the crime, no less and no more. It was a restraint on the innate vengeance that's in an evil heart. You see, an eye for an eye didn't mean, boy, when you get it, give it back. It meant that when justice functions, let it never go beyond its bounds. If it's only a tooth, then only a tooth should be taken or in kind. And usually it was money to compensate, not an actual tooth. In other words, God was limiting the innate evil human heart, which always seeks to go beyond how it's been offended. Nobody ever murdered anybody because they got murdered. Never. They go way beyond. You mess around with my girlfriend, bang, you're dead. It's always beyond. It's always an overreaction, and that's why God said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, no more, no less. Put the boundaries on justice. In the Old Testament, it doesn't mean take personal revenge. That isn't the idea at all. Do I often seek more than what justice, i.e. an eye for an eye, might require? If so, how so? And if not, why not? Isn't it interesting that God knows us so well that he actually points this out to us? You know, I'm going to put, guardrails in place. When you're dealing with meting out justice, you have to play within these guardrails. And the guardrail says you don't overreact. You don't exact more than the damage that was done you.
Well, yeah, because in that case, then you're just as bad as the other person, if not worse.
Yeah.
I heard, I think it was David Jeremiah said this week, talking about vengeance.
Uh-huh.
And he said, this is what you think about, because the problem is you say, well, I'm going to get them back. So what you really is saying, I'm going to be evil. I want to be evil or eviler to them than they were to me. And when you think about it like that, you're like, that's true, because that's what you're saying. I'm going to get them back. I'm going to be more evil
think
to
evil
them
for
than they
people.
were to me,
Yeah.
which is how we are.
Yeah. And again, and God in his grace, has established guardrails that if we would abide by them and live, that way, how different would the world be today if people put guardrails on their justice? This is 1 minute. So, in today's system of justice, if a witness lies under oath, they can be charged with perjury and making a false statement under oath. And maybe a few more charges get thrown in for good measure. According to Nolo Publishing, quote, a person convicted of perjury under federal law may face up to 5 years in prison and fines. That's 18 U.S. Code Section 1621. The punishment for perjury under state law varies from state to state, but is typically a felony. Felonies carry a possible prison sentence of at least 1 year plus fines and probation. In Moses' day, God spelled out what happens to lying witnesses. Deuteronomy 19 verses 15 to 21 tells me, a single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, And if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. There again. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. And again, I ask the question, which system of justice would I want if I was on trial today? Isn't it interesting, if you're caught lying, nowadays nobody lies, they misspoke or misremembered, okay?
Right.
Or anything other than liar, liar, okay? So, but they can be charged with perjury, okay? And spend some time in jail. But if you were a false witness back in the Old Testament, let's say between murder and manslaughter, and they now are holding the trial in front of the congregation, and you bring out these false witnesses, well, what was the penalty for murder? Death. And I think death by stoning?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So if I were a false witness and got caught in my lie, I would be stoned to death, because that's what I was trying to have happen to the accused. What would happen to the lying, misspoken, misremembered people who testify under oath if that were the gold standard for the day? We're out of time.
I wanted to ask,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any reference in the Bible that anybody ever used the city of refuge, is there?
I didn't hear that.
I said, I don't think there's a reference in the Bible that anybody ever used the city of refuge.
Oh, no,
Is there? I don't believe so.
I don't think so.
I mean, I know Joab went into the temple when Saul was going to put him to death, but that was not the city of refuge.
Yeah,
So it's just interesting. I mean,
yeah.
they had that. It's just kind of like us with, we have God's grace, but yet we don't take advantage of it.
Yeah. And again, I think the better we understand how all of this within the city of refuge and the trials and how it was handled and the way and what were the criteria and so forth, when we read, or when I take refuge under the wing of God, what does that look like? What does that mean? And as you could see, like in Numbers 35, there was a total protection for the accused until the trial, if it was determined that we think there's enough evidence that it could be manslaughter and not murder. There was an absolute protection put in place. They could still wander around in the city and stay there, okay? And if the trial resulted in it was manslaughter, they stayed there until the high priest died, and then they could go back to their town. If it was found to be murder, they were taken out and handed over to the avenger of blood, to the family member who was to exact the punishment for what was done to the family, okay? But in the meantime, until that happened, there was absolute protection. When I flee to the Lord for his, for refuge, because why? I didn't do it, or, maybe I did, but I'm going to go to him. We read about throwing yourself on the mercy of the court, Well, you can't throw your mercy on the court if you don't show up in court. You have to be there. In our times of trouble, in these trying times today, we need to be running to our place of refuge and knowing that we will have absolute protection under his wing. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you how even something like the cities of refuge in Numbers 35 can just be so rich in showing us who you are in our relationship with you. It is truly an amazing thing. We stand in awe, and we humbly ask that you would help us in these troubling times, that we can come to you, our refuge, knowing that under your wing we have total protection. And with that we can actually have peace and joy. We thank you, Father, for that love, for that grace, for that mercy that you provided for us and that you provide even today. We thank you and praise you and give you all the honor and glory. We ask this in your Son's most precious name. Amen.
Thanks so much, Rick.
Yeah.